So we are going to go over the stretches that we've been doing for Red Rock. And I always tell everybody to just kind of make sure that you don't have your horse tied solid to something when you're stretching, because you may have to have more room. Like if I have this horse too close to my stall, I'm not going to be able to get a big stretch in the front because I've run myself out of room. So I always kind of just loop my rope through and leave him loose. And so the first stretch that we're going to go over is going to be our front leg. And so we're going to pick this leg up. And so like you can even kind of just mobilize this foot up and down. This would be more of a stretch that we would do for a horse that had coffin joint issues or navicular or a problem like that. But it's a stretch that you can do for any horse. And so now I'm just kind of making circles with that hoof, just checking for range of motion, just checking for that movement. The other thing you will notice whenever you go to bend the toe is you can feel up and down the soft tissue of the leg and feel how much mobility is there, feel if there's any clicking, anything hanging, which I don't feel at all on this horse. And so then I'm going to go to my first stretch. So I'm going to bend his foot up. A lot of times I see this stretch done this way, and it's not improper. I just like to have a little bit more flexibility, and so I will actually close off the stretch by bending this hoof up, and then I'm going to ask this horse to push his leg back. And so you can either use your knee, like I do here, or you can use if it's a horse you don't trust, you can just use your hand. I tend to like to use my leg to help. And so I'm not pushing up. One thing to remember is I'm not pushing up with the knee, I'm actually pushing back with the leg. And sometimes the height of your horse makes a difference on how that stretch feels. And so I'm going to just take him to his tolerance, and then I'm going to ask him to hold it, about 10 or 15 seconds. And if he starts to push back on me, kind of like he's doing, I'll go ahead and let him bring it back forward, and then I'll go right back into the stretch again. And so we want to make sure that we're doing these stretches very slowly. You don't want like a jerky movement. And I know it's hard whenever you're not used to stretching horses, because it's a little bit hard on your body to have to stand in a stance. Other things to remember too is making sure that you've got your stance wide enough. If this horse takes his foot away from me, that he's not going to end up on my toe. So then from that stretch, we're going to go to, and you may want to come around to the front. We are going to go to cross. We're going to take our hoof and we're going to cross it over our knee. And then I'm going to pull this part of the knee out. So basically what I'm doing with this stretch is I'm doing a similar stretch to this one right here, but I'm giving my owners a point of reference to stretch for. So if you have a horse that this is all of the range of motion that they have, then we know we need to do some work. But where this horse, he crosses over very, very well and is able to open that knee. And so that's going to help open that shoulder up. And then I'll let him go back to what I call neutral. And then I'm going to ask him to stretch again. And then I'm going to go back to neutral. So another thing that you could do, you could also kind of roll that knee, do some circles with it. You can also bring it to the outside. Good boy. And this is all just going to mobilize that shoulder. And then I'm going to come forward. And so I'm just going to stretch him to his tolerance. And I'm going to ask him, I'm going to reach up, I'm going to grab the elbow, and I'm going to ask him to flatten that knee out and really point that toe. So that's a really good stretch there. And if he needs to kind of recoil back, that's okay. I'm going to ask him to come back into the stretch again. So the stretch coming forward, he's not able to hold quite as long, and that's okay because we're building on that. So if we were doing a pre-race stretch, I would go ahead and let him flatten his knee. So straight in front of me is neutral. And then I can go one step to the inside, give it back to him, back to neutral, and then one step to the outside. So what you'll notice is I'm not turning my body to maneuver him, because that puts me at a weak point if he were to take this leg away from me, because I'm not square. And so once we get our neutral, one step to the inside, one step to the outside, now we can do it a little bit faster, and we can, good job, we can have a little bit of a rocking motion there. And so if he wants to get heavy, I'm going to just ask him to bend his knee back up and to take his weight back on his hind end. So if you have a horse with a lower leg injury, you can still do the same stretch. If you don't want to do the full stretch, you can modify it and still come forward, still to the outside, using just the knee. And then I'm going to just kind of, I want it to be my idea for him to set his foot down. So I'm going to ask him to bend his knee and then set it back nicely. And so now I'm going to do a hind leg stretch. And so I'm going to bring this leg forward first. One thing I want to take note of is how heavy the horse's leg is when he goes to pick up that leg. How much do I actually have to lift on him versus what he's lifting himself. And then I'm going to make a platform with my hand, and I'm going to ask him to sink into this stretch and really point his toe. Now see how he got really heavy there? That's just one of the things where you've got to kind of ask them to take a little bit of their weight back, or I ask him to sink too much into the stretch. So if he wants to drop on me, I'm going to back off just a little bit. So I'm going to leave it right there. Even though he hasn't completely dropped through that ankle, that's still a really good stretch. The next stretch I'm going to do is going to be this one's going to help open the hip. So I'm going to make a bracket with my hand around the hock, and I'm going to make a bracket around my ankle. And so I'm not pulling out on his leg, on the bottom of his leg. Basically what I'm trying to do is open the hip up by encouraging the whole leg to come out. So my intention is on the hip above. And so I would like for him to point his toe a little bit more, but if he can't, that's okay. And I'm actually going to kind of move him back and forth a little bit. And so when it gets to a point where it's too much for him, I'm going to just kind of let him reset, and I'm going to go back to where he was comfortable. So the more, I'm not going to force him to do this. I'm going to find a place where he's comfortable, and then he's going to be able to build on that. So if this is all the movement I can get, that's a starting place. And then I'm going to do my stretch backwards. And so I'm going to just basically sink into this stretch, and I'm going to push down on the top of the hop. And when I get a nice stretch there, I'm going to take him and I'm going to go one step to the outside, and I'm going to let him stretch there. So this kind of helps open that pelvis up as well. And then I might even actually go back and revisit this stretch that was a little bit harder for him. It's okay. And that one's still a little bit hard. So that's something I know I'm going to have to work on. So this horse actually has some desmitis in this left hind. And so let's talk a little bit about massage techniques that we can do to help loosen this up. So just working with our hands, buddy. So just working with our hands, we can go down here and just kind of loosen everything. Of course, now that I've been picking his feet up, he's going to think that I want him to pick his foot up the whole time. But so basically what I'm going to do is just kind of rock that fascia back and forth and just kind of get this to all loosen up. And so my goal is, you know, I'm not really putting a lot of compression on there. I'm just asking it to glide and move. Good boy. And so these are going to be techniques that any horse owner can use. Also too, like getting right underneath the ankle here where they have a tendency to kind of pack some fluid. You can get right underneath there. Good boy. I can also kind of use his hair a little bit to use that hair follicle to stimulate and get some circulation to the area. Good boy. And so any place that I feel any fluid, I'm going to target a little more to that area. You can also come around to the front and kind of roll back and forth there, which is going to get that fascia gliding and moving. And I can also go all the way up to the hock. Good boy. And you can kind of maneuver everything around that calcaneus bone. You can work all around the joint. You know, I feel like everybody targets your big muscles whenever they're doing massage, but these are the places that we get fluid trapped the most frequently, is down in the lower leg, and we want to get that fluid return back up into the body. And I'm not sure if you can see, you may have to come this way. So then I want to work on my areas over the hock joint. So I'm going to kind of just work back and forth across this. And again, these are massage techniques that any horse owner can do. You don't have to have a skilled background of anatomy. Like this, these are the type of things that I teach my owners whenever they pick their horses up. That way they can maintain in between seeing a professional. You know, nothing I'm teaching is a substitute for good veterinary care. It's not a substitute for using a professional, mostly because your horse owner's hands are going to wear out a lot more quickly than somebody that does this for a living like I do. But these are just a few things that you can do, especially when you know you have a problem area on the horse, that are going to be really, really helpful. And so the next stretch I'm going to show is I'm going to do a bit of a hip stretch with him, and then I'm going to do a belly lift with him. And so if we were doing a complete stretching session, obviously we would do the other two legs, but for time, I'm going to just kind of stay in my target area here. So whatever we do on one side, we're obviously going to do on the other, but I'm just saving a little bit of time. So with this horse, there are two ways to do a hip stretch. You can use two dowels where you have to stand straight behind them, or you can do like I'm going to do here, and you can use one dowel. And so basically I'm going to travel down till I find the end of the sacrum, and then I'm going to ask him to bow up and to hold that stretch. So immediately what he does, if you can step back where you can see, he wants to offload this leg a bit instead of actually squatting even. And so then that actually will kind of change the way that his sacrum looks, because he's trying to offload the weight. And that's something that we expect on a horse with a weak area. So I'm going to try to balance him up, getting a little more square here. And then I'm going to come at the stretch again. Good job. So that's a little bit better now that I ask him to balance. And so I'm actually not even having to put a lot of weight on him. It's more about finding the head of your tail and asking him to arch up. I don't want to do it fast. I don't drag fast because I want to build that muscle memory, and I want to build those nerve pathways that help to correct the imbalance of the sacrum. And so if you'll come from this side where you can see his whole back, you can see how far it opens up, even just a little bit of a stretch that he's holding. And I'll do usually about 3 of these. So look at how that opens the spine through there, just having him do that stretch. It brings his core up, everything's engaged, and that's a really, really good stretch. Another thing that you can do is you can do some tail pulls. And so whenever I do a tail pull, I will find the end of the tailbone. So I'm just below the tailbone, and I'm going to go 1 hand hold and then a 2 hand hold. That way I'm not pulling right on the tip of the tail. And so then I'm going to just kind of apply some pressure steadily with my weight. I'm not jerking him. I'm not trying to do any sort of an adjustment or pulling hard. I'm just putting my weight on the tail. And so as he gets more stable to that stretch and he gets more used to it, then you can modify by stepping to one side and making him stabilize against the tail. And then again, you can go back to neutral. And then you can step to the other side. And you'll notice on horses that are weak, you will notice one side will spasm more than the other. And so that's one way that I kind of gauge how my muscles are building back and how my atrophy is starting to disappear. Another thing on this horse, whenever we look behind, which again, we know we would be stretching this side, but I'm saving a little bit of time. So since he is a little bit overbuilt on the inside of these hind legs, you could do some cross fiber friction right here, simply because he compensates a bit with this side. And then another stretch that I'm going to show is going to be it's not really a stretch, it's a stifle rock. So I'm going to come around to the inside of the thigh, and then I'm going to come around the front of the stifle. And I'm just going to rock this horse back and forth. And what I have found with this stretch is, or with this motion, if you have any sort of a stifle issue, a lot of times you will feel that under your hand that's over the patella. So as I move this horse and rock this horse back and forth, if I was feeling any grabbing or grinding in that stifle, I would know that I probably needed to investigate that or have a vet investigate it. Another way you can do this is by using the tail to rock them back and forth. I find that they really like this, and it's really relaxing, and you'll see them sway all the way up to their head. But that's one that I use a lot to check that stifle and see how it is. So then the last thing I'm going to show on this horse is going to be a belly lift. And so I'm going to take my dowel and I'm going to start between the front legs. I'm going to start a little bit in front of the wither area. That way I'm starting right there at T2. And I'm going to ask him to lift. And so he does a very nice lift there. And then I'm just going to continue on down his back. Now, if you have a horse that has ulcer issues or stomach issues, the farther back you go on the belly, they will possibly kick at you. So that's one thing to take caution of whenever you're doing these stretches is, making sure that you don't have any ulcer issues, because you're not going to get a good stretch and you're going to end up with a very frustrated horse. So again, I'm going to go, now that I've let him relax, I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask him to lift his belly again. Good job. And if he has a little more lift to him the second time, that's great. If he doesn't, I'm going to ask him to lift to the same spot. And then I'm going to do this one more time. Just like my hip tuck, I usually do those in 3s as well, unless I get a really, really good stretch the first time. There we go. Boy. And so you can tell he gets a little bit agitated and a little bit sore because we're working on building back. And so those are kind of the stretches that we're going to send this horse home with. And then we'll take him outside and we'll show some of the corrective exercises that we're doing with him.